working in these patterns, and it's deep enough, about 2 metres deep, that the top water is just rolling over it. Then it doesn't matter how big that top water becomes, because it's protected from touching the grass by that layer of water you set up in the initial stages. It's quite complicated, and it's quite difficult to stand here and explain it. But I'm quite happy anytime to go out or to set up little models and demonstrate that it's all very real. And so, introduction to Tarwin Park. The reason that there is a significant opportunity for me to stand here and talk to you is because I came into this catchment where these cycles of landscape function that I mentioned in the beginning had been manifested to the greatest extreme at this property, because Herbert Thompson had, in the 1900s, after the flood cycle, there was obviously a rapid recovery, because by 1910 there were 38 dairies supplying a cheese factory, which was right next door to this place. And then in 1922, Herbert Thompson started a horse stud, and it became the home of Heroic, who was the leading sire for 7 years. And he had 14 other stallions, and the roads in and out of there, for anyone that knows the area, at that time were almost unable to be trafficked by anything larger than a horse. In fact, I was told of stories where wagons, they used to cut a tree down at the top of some of the inclines and hook it to the wagon, and I think there were 2 or 3 instances where the tree bolted and rolled the wagons down into the gullies along with the bullocks that were pulling it. So it was impossible to bring feed from the inland of Australia, so he brought it all from overseas via Newcastle. That's why those plants are there. And the next issue was, we had then what I believe is a major opportunity. Yeah, we're looking at a floodplain, which when I first went there, looked exactly like the photographs I showed you, with tall weeds. Virtually what I didn't recognise was understory grass, and there was a change in the water pattern which had created a salinity outbreak. And there's a fellow who was a very experienced land manager and farmer said to me, "You've brought a sow swamp." Oh, well, I said, it's got plenty of water there and it's got a few nice facilities, so maybe I can do something with it. My son has been running it for 12 years. I used it extensively for horses for about 15 years prior to that. And that situation, after the weeds, has been that hundreds of people, perhaps thousands, have been there and looked at it ever since. The weeds are not a problem. We recycled them, and the grass is able to dominate those plants because we know them as pioneers. We know them as those plants which repair the system after it's been exploited. Now, this is a very, very important set of factors that I don't think science has even bothered to establish the credibility of it. I think a good reason. Who's going to pay you to tell you not to spend money and the fact problems you've got will fix themselves? The only time this research has been done is when some fool like me suddenly realised that this was critically important information. And I've had to suffer all sorts of troubles, as you would all know, because people said that bloody fool is just growing weeds, and the other thing they used to say makes water run uphill. So the next issue is, when we look at that land, you know there's a 40-foot fall from the top of that picture to the bottom, and it's sand, and it's developed progressively. Now, I've had plenty of, in fact, a good one here, geomorphologists look at this and say how long, how stable, and how long would it have taken for this thing to form, and it had to be done on a continuous basis, and the answers are perhaps 5,000 years. So we've got a circumstance proven in this country of a process that can produce massive intakes and uptakes of carbon, even if it takes a little bit longer to turn it into humus in the soil, we can then formulate some simple additions to just that area. You'll see there's a few trees planted, but my plan was each of those rows be about 50 to 100 yards wide, and they actually be full of edible, coarse vegetation. So I call them paddocks for the herbivores, you know. We don't run grassivores, yet we're turning this whole country into grass, which was the last included species. What's wrong with our common sense? Why can't we understand that we have been led around by the nose by the agronomist, or that fellow wanting to sell us seed, or the bloke that wants to sell us chemicals? Because he's making money. This process doesn't cost any money. You just got to learn how to use it. And it does all the things that Willie and these people have told you. It manages the water, it manages the matter of other process and the minerals. And it dampens the climate and keeps it cool. Are you wanting me? 5 minutes. How many? I've got 5 minutes to keep raving to you people. The issue is you can keep going on forever, because the complexity, as you've heard today, can completely blind us to the simplicity. And that's why I just wanted to put 2 or 3 photographs up. When I went to Tarwin Park, it was a bit like the photograph I showed you earlier. That's a property about 3 kilometres away. And it's been through a cycle where it was brought by a fellow who got a good agronomist in, and they sprayed out all the plants and they put in a crop. And it disappeared to sand. Now that particular part of the Bylong Valley does not have an eroded gully through it. And there was one reason that used to happen. We didn't have these controlled sprays. And I know the owners, I went and did the research of what happened in this valley, how did all this occur? And I knew that when it got to a stage where they'd overgrazed it, it just left it. And they knew that in 6 months it would be back better than ever. What's our problem? It's been going on for 50, 60, 70 years in this one valley. And it's run its own experiment, it's produced its own evidence, it's done all the things we need to know. Why do we have to get confused by all the technical detail? This thing has proven itself under the worst conditions pretty much. And all these scientists will give me a bit of a burst about that, because you can't oversimplify the complexity of a functioning landscape, but you can make it work. We've proved that. And it's not something, my son grew up there, but you know what sons are like, they don't always want to listen. And he's run it exceptionally well for 10 years, and he's been able to maintain a property that most people marvel at. But if he was asked to explain the basis of why I was able to get it established in the first place, he hasn't lived at Broken Hill. He hasn't lived in an estuary. He's only lived in a catchment. And so he can't possibly have understood. So why is it people say, oh, this is going to be very hard to learn. This is going to be very hard to do it. He doesn't even know anything else. And he's had no trouble doing it, really. There's a couple more shots and then I'll let you all have dinner. See that there? That's the same property. And see the water in the foreground and the well in the background. That water's trickling through that valley today. It was taken about 3 days ago. And you look down the well, it's 4 to 5 metres to the water. That was the same situation when we went to Tarwin Park, because you see we have this pattern, this distribution of very fine soil, very dense soil, and that's some coarse veins through it. But they are raised quite a bit above that area. So once we allowed animals to disrupt the plants, the flow which would have allowed dense vegetation in that low system was blocked, and it was then forced to go where that course of vegetation now exists, and that meant it was able to infiltrate very quickly. One of the first things I learned when I went there, if I changed the water from this drainage pattern to a perched pattern, that well, and it would be about 300 or 400 yards away from there, I could turn the water into the floodplain, and in a week that well would be full. So there, you know what we've got? A sustainable irrigation system, using the best principles that's been pointed out to you to date. Groundwater, feeding plants from below, keeping the matter that you need at the place where the greatest amount of productivity is achieved, on the surface. And then it keeps that soil cool. You know that if you fill anything with water, it takes a huge amount of heat to change its temperature. Whereas as soon as that land loses its water, the temperature changes dramatically daily. All these things are there. We don't have to re-experiment. We just got to go around looking at all the examples that exist in this landscape and know that we can interpret them, and know, as simply as been shown here in front of you, that we can install them. Thank you.